Welcome to the Rainmaker Podcast, where we elevate marketing leaders inside and out. I'm your host, Veronica Rami, master marketer, executive leader, and mentor to ambitious marketing leaders wanting to advance their careers. Each episode is filled with genuine, unscripted conversations with some of the world's top marketing experts, accomplished leaders, and industry trailblazers representing brands, both large and small. Our goal with this podcast and everything we do is to help you master your role, nurture your team, prioritize your well-being, and evolve into an industry-leading rainmaker. This is the Rainmaker Podcast. Oh, you guys, this episode that you're about to listen to is so good. It's so, what perfect timing. And I'm just fair warning, Surgeon General warning, it's a pattern interrupt from all my other episodes. This is unlike anything we've really aired on the Rainmaker Podcast with a very special guest, Miss Cathy Hiller herself. She is a private client of mine. She is a juggernaut of a personality. Her podcast alone has over 40 million downloads. Like, she's had the who's who in her world. And she came on the show to talk about something that I think every single professional in my life is struggling with, which is feeling and operating from a place of abundance right now versus scarcity. It's been a year, to say the least. And even when you learn about abundance and you learn about putting yourself in the driver's seat of your life, one thing is to say it or to read it. Another thing is to do it in real practical terms. And this conversation, she really helps you understand what it really means to be authentic to yourself, what it really means to operate your life in a place from abundance. Her storytelling abilities, her humor, her heart, like it's just like not that you'll cry on this episode, but you're going to feel the full spectrum of emotions listening. And it's, I think, one of the best ways to kind of conclude the year, given all that's happened for all of us in all walks of life. And so I couldn't endorse this episode any more than I do. We are very fortunate to have it. It was a joy to record it. So without further ado, please welcome my very special friend, Miss Cathy Hiller. Cathy, welcome to the podcast.
I love being anywhere that you are. So thank you for having me.
This is really exciting, you guys. So just so everybody understands some context. So Cathy and I are extremely close. Cathy has been a private client of mine. I've been behind the scenes in your world for quite some time. And to have you on this podcast is going to be such a beautiful pattern interrupt, I think, for listeners, because we're not just talking about making more money and marketing strategy and tactics, which is all good and fine, but we're actually talking about what they really need. What they really need. And the timing of this episode is perfection because 2024 is, it's kind of been a cluster year, not just with the elections, not just with marketing strategies being diluted and not working and they're not as effective enough, but like it's been an interesting season in business. There's been a massive layoffs or massive resignations. Like we're seeing both where people are just wildly burned out. And not only have we had to decide who to vote for this year, but we've had to decide who we want to be this year. And that has been super loud, I think, for everybody, both in my corporate life, but also in my private sector life. What do you see with the type of clients that you and like the people that you serve on a weekly basis? What's this groundswell that I'm speaking of? You feel it too, huh?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I feel like every human being is always on this quest for meaning. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that we think we want success, but what we really want is significance. And so I think that that's like the always eternal adventure that humankind is on. And so I think that we tend to think of the season that we're in as being particularly juicy or difficult. But if you look back at like the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages or communist Russia or whatever, like the Aztec, I mean, there's just always been just so much happening, right? And I think in a way, what we're actually perceiving is there's so much awakening that's happening that we have elevated our need for fulfillment at this point because we have progressed so much as a human species that now at this point we're asking ourselves bigger questions because there is more consciousness, there's more
Mm-hmm.
of a sense of having deeper purpose and more of an impact, and those are really great things. What I see is that people struggle with feeling good. I think people struggle with really feeling in the flow state. I think that people struggle with being sort of the captain of the ship. I think that our minds are more and more problematic because there's more and more stimulation, there's more and more noise from the outside. And I think what then happens is it dilutes our intuition, it dilutes our inner voice, which actually takes away our well being. We talk about having clarity. Well, wisdom is also known as insight. Where does it come from? Within.
Mm-hmm.
When everything is a conference call, when you're constantly on
Mm-hmm.
social media, what you're doing is you're looking outside of yourself constantly, and then you're comparing yourself constantly. And I think what most people do, I think inherent in every human being is the need for belonging. So I think what causes a lot of pain and problems is that instead of having this capacity to go within the sanctuary of your own intuition and guiding your life from there, you're constantly taking a pull of what's happening around you and then trying to be whatever is pleasing to the world at large, which dilutes your authenticity, which makes you feel the opposite of free because you're trying to be somebody that's liked by everybody. That's not good for marketing because in order to do something powerful in the world, it should be polarizing. Not everyone should like it because by doing something that everybody likes, you're basically saying, I don't have a point of view. My point of view is I like and believe everything that you all like and believe, which means I'm safe. But everybody that we've ever looked up to in history, whether it's Serena Williams or Beyonce or Maya Angelou or Dr. King or JFK, or I mean, name a person in athletics or theater, or the reason we look up to that person is because they stand out. And
Mm-hmm.
because they stand out, they can't fit in.
Mm.
You don't fit in and stand out. We are now in a place where we're constantly online and we're constantly diluting who we actually are. And then what we think is, we just need more validation from the outside to feel more of that inner wholeness, but it's the opposite. And so what I'm saying is, I think what is particularly unique to this time is that we spend our time constantly evaluating what's happening around us and then deciding who we will be
Mm-hmm.
in order to be safe in the world around us. And I think that's different because up until this time period in the 80s, I didn't know what was happening with my neighbors down the street or what they ate for lunch or who was having like the best sex of their life. Like no one was taking you on that journey. And so there was a little bit more space for your own thoughts. And you would then de facto sort of take the risk of being yourself. And sure, there were still people who wanted to fit in and dress the way everybody dressed and be a sum of everything around them and be an average of everything around them. But I think deeply, my dad just passed away, and there's a book that Bronnie Ware wrote on the greatest regrets of the dying. And she was a hospice nurse for 9 years. And she said the number one regret of people on their deathbeds is the following: I didn't live life on my terms. I wasn't authentic to myself. I led the life that other people wanted me to live. My uncle, my father, my husband, my children. That's what I'm saying. I think that no matter what we're trying to achieve on a success level, on a business level, the greatest feeling in our hearts is the feeling of being right and true to ourselves. And that's a feeling of freedom and abundance that no amount of external validation gives you. And that's what I'm saying is unique to this time period. So there's always been contrast and darkness and lightness and good and bad throughout history. But what's unique to this time is people becoming a version of themselves that they think will fit in with everything else, so that when they post something on social media, it gets a like. That is insane. And that's what's causing mental illness. And not that that's the only thing causing mental illness, but I'm
Yeah.
saying that is what I could say to
Yeah.
you is unique. And that's actually what keeps you from being successful, let's say, in your business. Because
Yeah.
in your business, like I said before, there has to be something. We've talked about this, whether it's when you're going back to identity, when people are buying something, it's about what is different than everything else that helps me elevate who I tell myself I am. So all of that works together. And so what I've been working on for the last 20 years is helping people to be authentic, to get paid to be themselves, but also at the foundation of it, how do you feel like yourself every day instead of living Groundhog Day, pretending to be the person who you think you need to be in order to be quote unquote safe? That is the place where you will feel least safe because you're still playing a part when all your
Mm-hmm.
soul wants to do is feel like who you came here to be
Mm-hmm.
and to feel located inside of yourself rather than being something that then you no longer belong to anyone because you don't even belong to yourself. So I've been trying to give people tools and practices to find peace of mind and their intuition, which leads you into creative downloads, which leads you into, I often say this and then I'll pause, but I often say, all you have to be is yourself for you to receive whatever's meant for you in this lifetime. What does that look like then? Are you really
Mm-hmm.
being yourself?
Mm-hmm.
What does it look like to actually wake up and not be conditioned into the mind that's telling you all the limitations, that's telling you all the things that are not possible? What does it feel like to actually break free from that and to be who you actually are and to find the wholeness within you because you are whole, and then to live your life from that place? And when you do, you already start to feel pretty fulfilled because it's a very fulfilling experience when the journey itself feels like you're just being exactly who you're supposed to be, right? And so that's the stuff that I'm unpacking with people. And what's amazing is once they get free of that, the success, it's instant. It's like you become a magnet for that because there's a different vibration that's coming from the person.
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts that are going through my mind. Like, I remember when I first started out in my marketing career, I'm going on like 16, 17 years now. I desperately wanted to fit in. Like, I desperately wanted to shed this like collegiate look,
Mhm.
this youthfulness, to put myself in a real job with like, I remember I went shopping with my mom and we got like two-piece suits and I got like a special computer laptop bag, and I wanted desperately to speak like corporate executives and walk like corporate executives and talk and look, and if you're not careful, you stay in that paradigm prison of wanting to fit the mold. And then every time you jump jobs, you repeat the cycle all over again, because every job has its own culture and its way of working and doing and execution. And you desperately go from being one little bee in one little, hive to fitting in quickly to the next hive and the next hive. And after so many transitions in your career, like, whoa, like who am I? Because now I've taken on everybody else's identity. Like, I remember that was really significant for me, going from director of or chief of staff of or for to, hi, I'm Veronica and I'm representing Veronica. Holy
What
crap.
is that? Yeah.
like this is wild. And I joke, that I make this joke on stage because like I'm not the most woo individual. I'm woo curious, but honestly, I'm still, it feels ethereal, it feels intangible. I still like, I want to grasp for what you're promising. But how, like, even at a basic level, Cathy, like, define abundance. Like, when you say abundant, what does that actually mean to you? Because I don't even know if we're defining it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way that, let me just start by saying this. I think the way that we are taught to define abundance is through material wealth.
Yes.
I think that we have way bigger dreams than that. Like, I think that there is a very deep part of us that knows that we didn't come to the world to collect a pile of things. We have way bigger dreams. We want well being, we want meaning, we want purpose, we want peace of mind, we want to feel contribution, we want to feel connected to God, we want to feel connected to the divine, whatever word you use for it. You can have a moment like I had with my dad in hospice where I'm holding his hand and singing to him. And you feel so complete in that moment that if somebody were to ask me, "Oh, hey, Kath, do you want to just leave for an hour? There's an amazing shopping spree that you were just gifted at Neiman Marcus." It's like it's so obvious in moments like that that there's nothing there for me. That everything I came to the world for was sitting in that room.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is that true abundance is the feeling of knowing who we really are. And after college, I went to Jerusalem and I was supposed to be there for just a few weeks and I stayed for a few years. And I studied and I lived in the old city of Jerusalem. And my very dear mentor and teacher, Rabbi David Aaron, told me that we are each someone because we're some of the one. And we're each a masterpiece because we're a piece of the master. And when you study Einstein and he talks about how the world looks like it's 3-dimensional, but it's actually 10 dimensions because every atom is 99% a vibration. It's frequency, and only less than 1% of an atom is actually a physical 3-dimensional piece. So most of what's in the world is this infinite field that we're all connected. We just don't necessarily perceive it with our naked eye, but we actually are all part of this energy field, which is why in Blink, Malcolm Gladwell says that when somebody walks in a room, within 4 seconds, you can feel their energy, just like every wave connects to the whole ocean and it actually moves the ocean. We are each actually made of waves. Actually, that frequency is a wave, and that wave is connected to all that is and all that was. And it's this infinite source that comes from God, from the divine, from this oneness. So that is the greatest feeling of abundance, is knowing that what you really are when you were conceived in that moment, right? That is you, right? Your somebody that you've been playing is a character. But think about it. When I was in 4th grade, I had a different haircut and a different lunchbox. And when I was in 7th grade, I had different friends. So the external parts of me are always changing, but the internal part of me is always essentially the same, which is just the Cathy-ness of who I am, my soul, my being. My mom said, you and your sister, you're both different. You know, I'd walk into your room and you'd be like smiling and you just were very happy. That was your disposition. And your sister was a little bit different, you know, and there's this who we are at the very start, right, is always what is the energy of us, right? That is the truth of feeling abundant, is knowing who we really are, which is that we're someone, we're some of the one. And if you read anything about manifestation or anything that has to do with creating abundance in our lives, what we learn is that there's a law of resonance. And so we don't get what we want, but we do always consistently get back what we are. There is an echo to the way that the world works. And so if I went into the Guitar Center, if I went into a room, the Guitar Center is a big store that sells musical instruments. There's about 1,000 guitars in that giant warehouse. If I pick up a guitar off the wall and I play a G and I pluck that string, all the strings and all the guitars will vibrate, but not all of the strings, just the G, because it will be in resonance to the one I played. We are always doing that with each other. We're getting back what we are. And why do you have the friends you have? You're on the same wavelength. Why do you have the customers you have? You're on the same language. You're speaking the same language. It's a vibrational match. So when you go to set 2 people up, you set them up because there's something about the energy. You're like, I think that they would match each other vibrationally. They're in the same kind of orbit, the way they talk, the way they buy, the way they shop, the way they travel, the way they think, the way they vote. It's a vibrational match. And so there is no mistaking it. When you look at what your life is a 3D printout of whatever is coming from within you. So we are extremely abundant. God created the world through words, right? Let there be this, let there be that. We create our world through words. We create our world through the beliefs and the vibrations, because it literally is an energetic electromagnetic frequency that comes from us. And so after living in Jerusalem for 3 years, I then went to UCLA and I studied at their Mindful Awareness Center, which was really special because for those 3 years, I was looking at the actual energy and looking at the brain and looking at the way the activity that we send out into the world based on what we think and believe changes the field around us, literally changes the room, changes the field. We have the capacity to be so loving and so open-hearted in a room that we can actually change the well-being and biology of people in that room. I've actually seen that on a level where you can watch it under a microscope in people's cells. That is the greatest abundance. Can you think about that for a second? The fact that each one of us has the healing capacity to be so heart open, so genuinely present, that just our very being can love other people into life and change them on a biological level. What we're often doing is trying to be impressive from the outside, have the best
Yeah.
resume, have the best
Yeah.
clothes, have the most impressive car. None of that actually changes the field. What changes the field is the energetic presence and who you are, not what you've done, the being, the energy. So to me, that is the link to our abundance. And when we realize we've been endowed with the capacity, because we're connected to God, because we're connected to this infinite divine, that we can actually love the world into life. What is more abundant than having that power? Nothing.
Mhm.
Nothing. What is everything looking for in the world? Energy. Every flower is trying to move toward the sun. Everything's looking for energy. We can give each other life. That's why in the blue zones, they live longer, because they are in community. They meditate together, they pray together, and they stay together in a high vibration, which keeps them living into their hundreds because of the way they vibrate together. So we think we came here to collect likes and build our bank accounts and have more cars. There's nothing abundant in that. However, the word yoga means to yoke the physical and the immaterial. King David, who was one of the most spiritual people who ever lived, wrote all these Psalms, right? Had a tremendous amount of wealth, but that wealth was in proportion to his spiritual wealth. We are actually here, just like redwood trees can take up a lot of physical space and take up a lot of resource. We can have both, and that we're designed
Mhm.
actually to be thriving on both the physical and the spiritual level. The problem comes when we think that our abundance is entirely made up of the external, and that will never be anything close to what we're actually looking for.
Mm. Okay, so there's this thing that they say in church all the time where it's like to be in the world but not of the world. This juxtaposition, this paradoxical being where like exactly what you're talking. You're so good at the reframes and these little word truffles. By the way, you know that I love this about you. Like you're really good at shifting my paradigm all the time. And my husband, like he's a VP of sales at $100 million software company, right? And I'm an entrepreneur, and so we have these conversations all the time. And there's days where I look at him and I use him as an example because I think there's so many people that might listen to the podcast that might find themselves in a similar situation. Being an entrepreneur, I have a lot more control about me being in the right rooms and being around the right people who have the same energetic like elevation that I get to have, right? Like I have that
Sure.
autonomy being an entrepreneur. When you work for someone else, when you're working in the constructs of a different, structure, not so much. And so there are days where I watch him and I can tell that he's around people who are not in the same belief system of
Sure.
abundance. And so like I almost want like you to help with practicality. Like how do you do that? How do you practice on a daily basis when you have this understanding of what abundance really is and what you're really called to do and why you're here, but then you are back in the world, like you're back in the grind of the cubicle and like the results and the end of quarter and the goals and the KPIs and all this. Like how can one be in the world but not of the world? How can you be in abundance but not have your abundance leak out of you because of how you have to like provide for your families?
Well, I think one thing that we need to remember is that a lot of people sort of find their way to what is a very sort of mediocre way of using their mind. The mind is actually built to be extremely innovative. When we get into a little bit of a routine, it kind of lulls the brain to sleep and we stop asking the disruptive big questions. And so, even the premise of that is problematic, right? If you were to sit with real geniuses, if you were to sit in a room with Steve Jobs or
Mm-hmm.
Seth Godin,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going to be using their time to have conversation about certain KPIs. And they're going to be having conversations about, okay, let's throw everything away today for a minute and look at what's the question? What's the best question we can ask? What are we really solving for? And what is the biggest way to move the needle that's different than what
Mm-hmm.
everyone else is doing? Those are the kinds of questions that are worth asking. And so if you're listening to this and you're on a team where people are getting a little bit stuck in the weeds,
Yeah.
I would remind everybody that everything starts to become like white noise. And it might be helpful to be the one on your team that has the courage to say, okay, so I know that these are all sort of the process goals and the progress goals, but what if we asked a big question, right? When you think about the best marketing that we've all ever seen, it comes from a really creative idea. Now,
Yes.
here's the thing about
Yes.
creativity. The studies we have on creativity is that it comes from spontaneity. So if you look at Will Ferrell and you've ever seen a movie and you're like, he is hilarious, it's because he did not know he was going to say that a second before. And he probably did 48 takes of that. And one thing finally came out of his mouth. And what is it that he's doing is he's creating the conditions for which creativity can live, which means he's moving out of the ego, which is the predictable, which is trying to stay in the box, and he's
Yeah.
allowing himself to take risks and to move into the unpredictable. Jason Mraz, who's a friend of mine, was telling me a story that I've heard 1,000 times from 1,000 different people, which is that the song I'm Yours, well, you done me any bit, I felt it. He was messing around. Like, he wasn't supposed to write that. He wasn't trying to write that, but he was allowing himself to be silly and play with his ukulele. And then he wasn't even going to play it on the tour. And one of the girls who was in his backup vocal said, why don't you play that riff? I'm Yours. And he was like, nah. And they were kind of getting ready to warm up for a set. And he played it and everybody liked it. That became his single.
Yeah.
When Dr. Martin Luther King got on the stage, the biggest line that everyone remembers from him was, I have a dream.
Mm-hmm.
When he walked up to give that speech is actually in the Smithsonian and you can read it, and he had it memorized. The only thing not on that speech is the beginning of the speech, which he improvised because a woman who was standing beside him said, Martin, tell him about your dream. She screamed that out, Martin, tell them about your dream. And in this moment when the whole world was watching and he had tears streaming down his face and shaking, he decided not to read from the paper. And the first thing he said was, I have a dream. And that is such a vulnerable, open hearted plea to the world to say it like that. Yes, I can make a case. Yes, I can tell you what's happening on the ground. But let me start by telling you I'm standing in front of you, one heart to another, one soul, one human to another, and I have a dream. And here's what it's going to look like. And the world stood still. The world
Yeah.
will never forget. So what we do is we condense ourselves into these robots where we try to predict and we try to make decisions from being in a place of being safe and what we think is going to work and not work. And you and I both, and this is why I've hired you as a consultant, our favorite thing is to say, let's throw it all away for a second
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
let's go right to the heart and take a deep breath and say, what would be really interesting? What would really be different? What, and you look at Apple and you're like, even their tagline, think different, it's not even grammatically correct. You walk into Apple and instead of them making some decision about how to impress you with all of the decor, they decide to just make white walls because the feature is you. It's an iPad, it's an iMac, it's you're the star. It's about you. You fill the space. That is something that comes out of having a space where in a meeting, you allow yourself to let go of the goal and how you're going to get the goal. And you say, what is it that we could do that would actually touch the world in a unique way? Now, that is fun. And what I think has happened to all of us is we measure ourselves based on the outcome. But the truth is, the journey itself is the outcome you're looking for. You want to feel satisfied that your work, your life every day is a living tool to awaken you to have the next best creative download. If employees are not feeling that that's being asked of them, they should ask it of their employer because their employer will be better off if the human beings that are working there, no matter what your title is, if you're being invited to have bigger conversations and really keep asking, what's the mission? Howard Schultz, who grew Starbucks, said to me that the person who he sits beside in every board meeting, he says, I don't want my CMO sitting next to me. I don't want my COO sitting next to me. I want a customer, a regular human being. And I want to ask them, what happens when you wake up in the morning? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? And every meeting, he gets to go back to the drawing board and says, who am I serving? And what would actually make a tiny difference that we missed, that we didn't do, that we didn't see? That's why at Starbucks, they give you the, what do you want? Half cap, decaf? Because what they found is that people want to feel, even though it takes 3 extra minutes for the barista, the whole thing they realized was you could go to 7-Eleven and get a 75-cent cup of coffee. But what did people go to Starbucks for? Their own experience of self-care. No, this is my Starbucks. That's 8 minutes I take out of my day, and I spend $7 as opposed to 75 cents at 7-Eleven coffee, because I say, oh, well, she might have ordered that drink that way, but here's how I wanted a little different. And by giving the customer that sense, they learned that from constantly asking not from constantly saying to themselves, okay, here's our KPI. How are we going to move that needle? But how are we actually going to do something that's disruptive? So the true abundance that we have is in the joy. When we were all kids, what did we love to do? Be creative, to play. Along the ages of like 6, 7, 9, 12, 11, whatever that age is, there's some rejection that happens. And people say, oh, I know what I'll do. I won't leave myself open to being vulnerable to rejection. So I will just be a little soldier and do whatever I think will keep me out of the line of fire. And I won't actually offer an idea. That's why most people are actually not enjoying anything that they're doing. And that's why most of what people are doing doesn't work, because it's all just noise that blends into the background.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, the first thing that came to my mind as you're telling this story and teaching, I don't know if you saw this, but earlier this year, Warner Brothers, their Max brand, they were trying to promote the show House of Dragons.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading an article from the EVP of marketing for HBO Max. And she said, in one of our brainstorm sessions, somebody threw out, wouldn't it be crazy if we put a dragon up there? So wouldn't it be crazy, or what if? Like, I love those type of prompts.
Love
like,
that.
what if, or would it be crazy, or what, like just the hypothetical. Let's just throw it out there in a brainstorming session. Ted Lasso says never bring an umbrella to the brainstorm. And what that one individual's, bravery, that 2 seconds of bravery to be like, I have a crazy idea, led to them executing a 270-foot dragon that they wrapped around the Empire State Building. It took them 12 hours to install, months and months to make, just because someone said something in a meeting that was like, what if, would it be nuts if we did something like this? And like, I think about like workplaces where I've had a little bit more freedom, or I've had a little bit more, it's really safety, like psychological safety to do that, to have that brave 2-second moment. We're like, well, what if, or, and then the improv game, right? Like yes, and where there's no no's, right? So, Will Ferrell says this, and then Paul Rudd says this, and they banter back and forth. And there's like 50 outtakes of, Anchorman, but they're all brilliant. And it's just that yes, and that like, there's nothing that comes off the table. Everything is permissible. Let's just stay in the space of creation. And that's what was going through my mind as you were relaying this, because like, I know workplaces where I felt that magic. And then I've been a part of workplaces or relationships with consultants or clients, or like you were saying, like, when you're in a relationship to be safe to dream. And then when you're in a relationship where you can't. And like, once you know the difference, once you can pick up on like FM frequency, AM frequency, you can't ever not see it or feel it, right? And that's one thing that's become more abundantly clear in my life as I've become more professional over the course of the years, is to seek out to seek out the safety in which I can speak truth to power, or be creative, or like, you know what I mean? To put myself out there, and then also be loved and seen for who I am, and not have to adapt myself to being some polished cookie cutter Zara wearing whatever. Yep. And that has been a journey, to say the least. Like, if somebody listening to this podcast and they're like they're in it and they know they're in it, and we've brought that to their awareness, like, what are those early baby steps to get out of it? Do you know what I mean? Because like, I don't want it to feel like you have to quit your job tomorrow to be abundant. Like, that's not what we're saying either.
I think first of all, I want to just remind us that as much as we think that we are in control of everything, we're
I
not,
love
you
this.
know, and
Yeah.
there is something so powerful about looking back at your life and seeing how there's so much synchronicity. And
Mhm.
think about how you
Mhm.
met each of the best friends in your life, how you and I met. How could I have predicted that? I couldn't. That's what's so fun about the way that you're in the
Mhm.
right place at the right time. I think when we really grasp that, we understand that the world is always moving towards wholeness. Here's what I would say is like if you get a cut on your hand, without you doing anything, right away your body goes into repair it.
Yeah.
And a few minutes later, a few days later, it starts to actually repair itself. The world is doing that all the time. It wants to move to wholeness. When two
Mm.
girls move in together, they start menstruating at the same time. There's something bigger than us that's kind of constantly moving us toward a feeling of things being in balance and things being in rhythm. And we see gardens doing that and trees that will move their roots and wrap around wherever they need to go to get to the water source. So that's why there's synchronicity, because everything is constantly moving towards order. Whether we know it or not, that's how the world works. That's why gravity works how it does. So it's bigger than us. What is part, though, for us to do is to
Mhm.
set the direction with our free will of starting to have the intention, right? They used to say that it's cause and effect, but now they say
Mhm.
it's not. Intention creates effect. What does that mean? It means two people can do the same thing, the same cause, and it will have a different effect based on the intention. We've seen that, right? Two people can say the same words, but have different intention behind it, and it has a very different effect. When you wake up in the morning, when you are living your life, it is your job to say, I know that the universe, I know the world, I know the people, I know the way that the world operates is that it will move me toward where I am most meant to be in order to be of the most service. That is how it is designed. My job is to get my thoughts out of the way when my thoughts say, well, it's not possible or you could never do this. It's to say,
Mhm.
here's what would feel really fun. Here's what would feel like ease. Here's what would feel like joy.
Mm.
I'm going to look for the clues that I'm getting a little bit closer to that. So, for instance, maybe you have a job and you say, I'm going to ask myself a good question, which is, how could this job be more fun? Next thing you
Mhm.
know, maybe you hear your boss talking about something and you say, do you want me to work on that project? I actually might want to change my position a little bit and maybe I can find a way to make the job I have more fun. Or maybe you just start looking for clues. I'll give you a personal story, which is I moved to LA at 23. I came here to be in the music business. I was working on getting a record deal. And long story short, I had a record deal. I was with Lady Gaga at Sunset Sounds. I was working with the same producer who produced Vanessa Carlton. I was working on this record that was like a Colby Calais, Sheryl Crow type record. Thought it was like the best thing that has ever happened to anyone.
Of
So much
course.
fun. I got dropped from the label. I wound up at another label. I was like, look at me. I brushed myself off. I picked myself back up. Now I was at Atlantic Records. I was working on creating a soundtrack. Jack Johnson just did the Curious George soundtrack. I was going to do the soundtrack to a movie called Fraggle Rock. Weezer, Rivers Cuomo, and I were writing the music. Ahmet Zappa wrote the movie. Miramax was making the movie. They decided not to make it.
Mm.
I got dropped again. I wound up getting a job at a real estate development company that built commercial real estate properties for $300 million dollars all over LA. I got that job because I needed a job, and what you seek is seeking you. And I met a guy standing in line waiting for a table at Cheesecake Factory who owned this real estate development, and he hired me. 2 years into that, I knew that I was living somebody else's life. I was wearing a double
Sure.
breasted suit, driving to appointments at golf courses to meet with big investors to talk about things I didn't care about. And I knew that the talents and the gifts that I had were collecting dust, and it didn't feel good to be someone other than myself. I asked myself a question, which was a question I hadn't asked. Is there anything other than being a rock star? Could I do music any other way? Is it Beyonce or bust? Is it Taylor Swift or nothing? I had never asked that question. It was only very linear. It was like, I get a record deal or I don't. All of a sudden, I said, maybe there's another way. Maybe there's a middle path. Maybe there's another way to get paid to do music. I was like, I'm going to look for the clues. Sure enough, I'm talking to a friend and she says, have you heard about Ingrid Michaelson? I said, who's that? She's like, oh, she wrote this song because I love the
Mm.
way you say good morning. She's like, and her song's on Grey's Anatomy and she doesn't have a record deal and she's licensing her music to television shows. And I was like, a clue. I wind up deciding, what if instead of leaving my job and all of these things and making it so difficult, what if I just start reaching out to some people at Grey's Anatomy and I look for their email addresses and I start to be very much a hustler and I get resourceful and I try to see if I could license a song to TV. And then what if that would be enough of a clue to tell me, what if I then could leave my job? Maybe I could do that all the time. And so that's what I did. I wound up leaving my job because I was licensing music. I wrote music for Starbucks and Target and McDonald's and shows like Pretty Little Liars and Grey's Anatomy. And I did that for 10 years. And I made about $350,000 a year. And I was featured in these full page stories in Variety and Billboard Magazine, in the LA Times. And it was like,
So cool.
I thought, and I got married and I had 2 kids and I was writing music and I was making a decent living. I was making as much as my lawyer husband writing music for TV. And then I started a podcast called Don't Keep Your Day Job because I said, guess what, you guys? I have a news flash. Whether you want to do illustration or dance or photography, it's not all or nothing. It's not Van Gogh or nothing. There are
Sure.
ways for you to use your gifts and
Sure.
get paid. That was a side hustle. The podcast turned into something even bigger than that. I wound up stopping music after several years because the podcast took over. But my point is, once you start asking from a greater, wider consciousness, here's my next best question. What could be fun? What could be you will get the next clue. It is just the way it works. The problem is the clues are always hidden in plain sight. You're not perceiving them because you're not yet asking that question. You're not yet having that intention. So you're just doing Groundhog Day every single day. When you start to ask yourself, like, wouldn't it be crazy if, like you said, wouldn't it be fun if, and you think to yourself, what would be fun? How could I expand my capacity to receive a more fun, fulfilling life? What is a baby step that I could take? What happens to most people is they've already decided it's not possible and they stop asking those creative questions. And then they don't even perceive the opportunities they're walking right past all the time because they're not available for those possibilities. They're not even awake to them. They've just decided. Most people, when you talk to them, will argue for their limitations and tell you, well, here's why I can't do that. No, here's why I can't this. Which is why they're not available for it. It's the same thing with anything. Like, I have friends who want to get married, they want to date. They're seeing opportunities all the time and they're actually just rejecting them because they're not really open to it. They actually have already closed the door on their heart. They've closed the door to it. You know, my husband for years was a lawyer and he really wanted to do stand up. And he used to tell me all the reasons why it's not going to happen. It's too competitive. He did it. And eventually, after me really just like hammering this point home, I decided actually to let it go because I realized he couldn't hear it from me.
Yeah.
And once I kind of backed off and over time, one thing led to another. And he just started to like put it out there. Next thing we know, Jimmy Fallon is reading his jokes on the Tonight Show, literally saying his name, reading his jokes off Twitter, saying, this guy's hilarious. He just started one foot in front of the other, posting a joke. He had no followers. And next thing you know, he gets asked to write a packet for late night. And next thing he knows this, and next thing he knows that. And it's like, it was always here, but you were so adamant. Because when you're a child, and I go back to this, when you get rejected by somebody you have a crush on, when you get rejected because you try out for baseball and you don't make it, you say to yourself, oh, I have the perfect strategy. I won't want anything.
Oof.
Because if I want it and I don't get it, it hurts so bad. So I'll just tell myself, it's fine. I don't really love my job. But it's fine. And I won't even dare open the door to what could be more fun because then I'm vulnerable. And what if I don't get it?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a protective mechanism when really, look at you. You asked that question. You wound up going off on your own. Then you said, what else would be fun? Now you're like, I'm going to write a book. All you and I do is take the risk, which really is having the courage to get our heart broken. We'd rather
Yes.
have our heart open and alive and risk being broken than keep ourselves on the bench our whole life. And that's what it comes back to.
Yeah, it does. It's perfectly said. Gosh, I want to write everything you say. You're like a quote factory.
That's how I
Clues
feel
are
about
always no. Clues are always in plain sight. You argue for your limitations. I'm a big proponent of therapy. Love me some good therapy. And I was having a session this, last week, and generational burden is a real thing too. So, I'm as you said that, my brain instantly did a slideshow, a memory book of all of my parents and their parents and you know what I mean? Like I can hear play by play their arguments for their limitations
Yeah,
constantly so
I
that they're
wanna
not living their
I wanna
lives.
say something about that because I have a tremendous amount of conviction and it has to come from somewhere, right? Like,
Sure.
and here's where it comes from is that my mother was the most talented, in the senior yearbook, you get like most beautiful, most talented, most popular, blah, blah, blah. So she was most talented in her high school yearbook, and she was the lead in all the plays from like sophomore year through senior year. And she was born before women's libs. She was born in 1947, and she graduated high school before the women's lib movement. And so she had it in her mind that it didn't matter if she had talent, because in order to live a good life, she had to give up any career aspirations in order to be a good mother.
Mm,
You and I, thank God, are of the inclination that we can be really good moms and we can also use our gifts, and that is
correct.
a path that is fully open and available.
Yes.
When I was growing up, my mom told me this story, which definitely left an imprint, which is that she had an understudy every year. This girl, her name was Ellen Green. She understudied my mother. My mother would get the lead, she would get the understudy. When they graduated from high school, Ellen said to my mom, "There is an audition for a play called Little Shop of Horrors, and I think we should go to the city and audition." My mom said, "Oh, I'll never go do this professionally. I'm going to get married to the guy I'm dating, my dad, and I'm going to have kids. There's no room for
Done.
me to have a
Done.
career."
Yeah.
Ellen went to the audition. Ellen got the part. Ellen became the lead in Little Shop of Horrors. Little Shop of Horrors was then turned into a movie. Ellen Green was also in the movie. She played Audrey. We used to watch that movie as kids. It's really cute. Steve Martin and Rick Moranis. It's a really cute movie. My mom would cry to me and say,
Yeah.
"This girl was my understudy. This girl. And I didn't have the guts to go to that audition." And she would braid my hair and cry. And she would feed me lunch and cry. And she would drop me off at school and cry. And my whole life, I knew how unfulfilled she was. And when my parents got divorced and my dad left and married someone else, she was left having to answer for the fact that she had given up and sacrificed everything that made her feel alive in order to do the quote unquote right thing, to then have this man get up and leave. And she was making him, by the way, responsible to fulfill what he couldn't fulfill, because happiness is an inside job.
Correct.
And that was such a glaring warning statement for me that I was like, I will never make my children or my husband have to make me fulfilled. I will use the gifts that God gave me so I don't tell my kids how depressed I am all the time. And I happen to have 3 daughters who I want to live lives where they feel alive and expressed. So I don't feel like I have a freaking choice. Like, I don't feel like it's a
Hmm.
choice. In fact, they say that the greatest gift we give to our kids is the fulfillment of our own dreams. The greatest sadness that we pass down is the unfulfilled desires of our heart, because we then show that ceiling to them. Like, well, life can be
Yeah.
good, but only this good. I don't think God gives you a gift not intended to be given away. And so I
100.
think it's our job to say,
Hmm.
I'm going to seek for these opportunities because I wouldn't be given this without the
Yeah.
opportunity to present itself. You and I are both, we're very similar in a lot of ways. It's like, you are such a great speaker. There is no way God gave you that capacity to be articulate and not give you the opportunity to articulate it. Other
100%.
people, they have other capacities. They're super compassionate. They're great listeners. They're great matchmakers. It's not possible that you were not going to be given that opportunity, but you're the one in the way because you have a belief. Like my mom's belief was being a good person equals sacrificing this whole thing called being myself.
Yeah.
That's very problematic.
Well, and yeah, and that's the thing too with my boys, because you have only daughters. My husband only gave me boys.
I know. It comes
God
from the
only
guy's
gave me
side.
some boys. Yes, so only the Romneys only make boys, I swear. And them watching me do hard things, or me
Sure.
using my voice unapologetically, or even like recently I've been head down in all this health stuff with my sister and everything. And so I've taken my body to the next level, trying to like make sure I live to 100. I want to be a centurion. That's the new goal, right? Is obviously God willing. But now my boys like, Mommy, can we work out with you?
Yeah.
Like they want to wake up early to work out with mom. And like, even though my husband's worked out forever and ever, but they want to work out with mommy. They want to do abs and they want to do sprints and they want to do it with mom.
Mhm.
And so,
Thank God. What a
yeah,
beautiful gift.
yeah,
Honestly,
yeah,
these are the intangible gifts. Like you can buy your kids whatever, fill in the
stuff.
blank.
Yes. Yeah.
It's who you
Yeah.
are. The legacy is them modeling who you show them that you are. And at the end of the day, if you want your children to have the courage to like try out again for the soccer team, but you're showing them that you're not fulfilled and you're not going
Yeah.
to ask yourself better questions, which will show them you being inspired every day, what kind of life is that? That's how I
Yeah.
felt growing up, is like my parents were upset, unfulfilled, disgruntled. It was like, this is what we do. We grow up, we go through all of life in order to just be unfulfilled people. That doesn't make sense. And so when I went to Jerusalem, I was like on a quest for fulfillment and meaning. And then right after leaving Israel, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to LA and use my gifts. And
Mm.
I first thought, right, I'll do sort of the unfulfilled dream that my mom had, and I'll be a songwriter. What's really cool though is that the dream you're meant to chase is the dream that chases you. And so it was actually perfect that I didn't get the record deal in the end, because I wound up using my voice in the podcast, which really is me. I don't have
Oh,
to be
yes.
someone else. I don't have to
Oh,
parade around in a
yes.
costume. I get to be myself. So it was even supersized. It was like God was like, you thought you came to LA to use your voice, to wear these like little skimpy dresses and
Yes.
open for the Pussycat Dolls, which is what I was doing. He's like, no, you're going to get to be yourself and encourage and inspire others. And that's how I'm going to have you use your voice. And so I think when we let go of how we think it needs to go, but we know it will go,
Yeah.
God is just like, I will meet you there with so much grace.
Yeah, and this is what I mean, like, not to be Simon Sinek-y, but it's like, yeah, like I feel like we're so limited to finite ways of being,
Yeah,
where like how if you prescribe to the universe, if you prescribe or subscribe to like a bigger authority than
of
yourself,
course.
it's infinite possibilities. This is why I'm so grateful you have this book, Cathy. Can I just tell you, I'm just so excited. Like book as somebody who is trying to put a book together in real time right now, man, it's a lot of work.
Yeah,
And
it is.
most books don't ever see the light of day, right? And so the fact that you've taken your time and your energy and to put it into writing, into this new book called Abundant Ever After. By the way, I love it. Again, I love the little play on words. So Abundant Ever After. I'm so grateful. It's not your first book, but why are you so excited about this book at this time?
Uh, I really am so excited about it at
I know
this
you are. I'm so
time and this book, because, my first book was called Don't Keep Your Day Job. And it's all about how do you
hmm
like find your gifts and purpose and get to do you for a
hmm
living. And I liked the book a lot, but this book I love.
hmm
And I love this book because these are all the best things I could possibly say, that I think immediately, like within reading like a paragraph of the book, you'll feel your heart open and your mind expand. And you will feel a sense of like, you can touch it. Like immediately you'll be like, oh my God, you know how certain thoughts, and we've shared some of them today, but certain thoughts, just a thought alone can move you closer to feeling whole.
hmm hmm
This book has like a whole lot of that in it.
hmm
And I think it's urgent. I think the only thing that's urgent is the well being of the people on the planet.
Yeah.
And as Viktor Frankl said, it's like man's search for meaning. We have pain that we experience in life. Life has pain, it has ups and downs, but the suffering is optional in certain ways. There's so much that each one of us already has at our fingertips. There's so much
So close. We're
in
so
us and all
close.
around us.
Yeah.
And when we
Yeah.
change the way we see, the things around us change. And I don't think it's what I love about this book also is I think I make these things make sense because I studied it from a spiritual lens and then I studied it
Yeah.
from a
True.
science lens. And so in the book, there are these tools for you to understand how to connect the dots, right? Your nervous system, your mind, how to get dominion over that so it doesn't just run the show, but rather you decide. I give people like a 90-second practice in the morning to say, instead of feeling the way I felt yesterday, thinking what I thought yesterday, and lulling my brain and body to sleep in the cortisol, which is the stress hormone that gets produced with every thought, which just makes me feel, I'm going to give you a 90-second meditation every morning to ask yourself, just like I select my clothes, I'm going to select my thoughts. How do I want to feel today? What would be amazing to co-create today? What opportunity could I be available for if I change the radio station that I am tuned to and I become a different frequency? And if I cast a different frequency, what music will play? What people will I meet? How could I touch somebody's life? How could I buy something for the person behind me in Starbucks and start a conversation? I'll tell you one quick thing. I went to dinner recently with my family, went to a sushi restaurant, and for some reason, I was compelled to buy dessert for the table next to us. It was this cute couple.
So
I could
nice.
hear their conversation and I knew they were on a first date. And there was something to me so cute about that. So I stand up and I say to the girl, are you guys on your first date? And she says, yes. And I say, pick something off this dessert menu. We're going to leave, but I'm going to order it for you and pay for it. And they're going to give it to you. And she says, that's so cute. She's like, what's your Instagram? I want to just thank you. 2 hours later, we're long gone. She sends me a text. The dessert was delicious. Thank you so much. We just finished our date. And I say, oh my gosh, how did it go? Are you going to have a second date? And she says, I don't know. I don't think so, but it really was lovely. And she says, I have to tell you, what you did is so powerful. She says, because I'm a widow and I lost my husband 4 years ago. And this is the first date that I've been on in 4 years. And the fact that you got up and gave me that dessert, it gave me the hope and the sign that there are really good people in the world. And I was meant to be on that date, that I had the right courage to do that. And I say to her, oh my gosh, my dad passed away recently on July 3rd. And she says, my fiance passed on July 3rd, 4 years ago. So here's what
No
I'm saying.
way. Oh, I just got chills, Cathy.
Sitting at the table right next to me, which would have been for most people what is hidden in plain sight, because I decided in that moment to do something impulsive and generous, I had a connection that gave me so much meaning because I was available for it.
Yeah,
And what I'm
you
trying
were.
to say is, when you wake up every morning and you have a brain that tells you nothing new is going to happen today, nothing good, nothing exciting, you're going to live the same life you lived yesterday, which is going
Right.
to kill your soul. When you
Right.
wake up in the morning and you say, I know that the world is moving us towards wholeness. I know that there's magic everywhere. I know there's clues everywhere. And you turn on and tap into the abundance within you, and you shine that everywhere you go, the amount that comes back to you, the amount of ideas, opportunities, people you'll meet, that's what this book is about. That's what's in this book. Everything is hidden in plain sight. And when you open up your own frequency, your radio turns on, the music comes in all around you, because like a radio, music is on right now in this room, but I don't hear it unless I turn on the radio. That's what I'm saying. And so it discusses that in the book. And I think that's why I'm so excited about it, because we're living in a time where a lot of things just cause us to get more and more into that sort of old way of thinking, the way we thought yesterday, and the predictable and the divisions and the heartache, and like it's a fait accompli and the world is terrible. And it's like, your particular world is the 5 people you're going to meet today. How can you get the most out of that? And how can you be a blessing in that? You can be. And the greatest feeling of abundance is being a blessing in your own world. You know, my rabbi says we're not actually asked to change the whole world, but we are asked to change the world for one person every day, because one person is a world. And I would say, I think the one person whose life we're supposed to change every day is our own. And from there, one other person. And when we each do that, we feel abundant. We're the ones who get the reward. We feel excited and alive and abundant. And we stop thinking, oh, if I just had more followers, if I just had a bigger promotion. It's like, your promotion is promoting yourself to being a soul every single day. And that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm so excited about the book.
Okay, mic drop moment. Like, that was so good. I'm in awe of you every single time.
You're so sweet.
And I listen, I'm one thing is to endorse the book. I'm endorsing you. I
Thank
have
you.
been behind the curtain very intimately. I know your team. I know your home. I know your
Yeah.
children. I know your clients. I know the people who work with you, buy from you, love you. You're the real deal, sister, like the real deal. And you are also, you're so funny. You're so wildly
You
entertaining. You have
are.
the best stories. So like, I can't even imagine this book's going to make you cry.
Yeah,
This book is going to
it's
make you
true.
laugh. It's like the whole
It
spectrum of
is.
emotion in finding and like being true to yourself. Like, what a beautiful invitation. I'm so grateful that you did this. I'm grateful that you talked about this on the podcast. I'm grateful for you. I'm just in abundance of gratitude. My
Thank
heart's
you.
exploding.
Thank you.
We'll link to all the things, but this is what I do love to tell people. I'm like, hey, words of affirmation are my love language. And so, like, if you've listened to this podcast and you've really enjoyed all that Cathy has shared, like, I want you to slide into her DMs because it is her, actually. It's actually her. And like, tell her how
Aw,
much you love her. Tell her how much this meant to you. Tell her which little word truffle or mic drop moment was your favorite. I usually have papers of like her little quotes everywhere. And you're most prolific on Instagram. I think if I slide into your DMs on Instagram, that's where you're at the most, I would say. But thank you, Cathy, for being on the podcast and just loving the
thank you. I wish
peoples.
every conversation I ever had was like this, because I
I
feel like
know,
you're
it's
such
so
an
fun.
open, loving heart, and you're so fun to be with.
Well, I've learned a lot from you. I mean, yes, in our professional life, but also just like I think you've been a mentor to me in many ways in living and inviting me to be authentically myself even more than I am. And so you've been an amazing role model for me too.
It's
So
such an
thanks.
honor.
Thanks. Okay. Well, with that, thanks for being on today's podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Marketers help other marketers. So if there's a marketer in your life who could really use a new perspective in a way that helps them advance their career, please pass this episode forward, share, leave us a review. Everything helps as we embark on helping as many marketers elevate themselves inside and out. You can always visit veronicarami.com for today's show notes, additional links to some free resources and tools for you to help you advance your career. You can always connect with us on social media at ViaRami if you want more behind the scenes or a way for us to connect personally. Until next time, my friends, make it rain.